Hello and welcome. My name is Riccardo Amati. I'm a journalist with Italy's daily Il Riformista and with other news outlets. Technology has enabled millions of businesses to stay open even in this period of lockdowns and in response to the coronavirus. And technology, in particular the mobile phone technology, has also helped counter the pandemic through modeling and through tracing human movement. It may be both a blessing and a curse. In this special MEF webinar, we'll look at the new use cases and explore the balance between effectiveness and privacy concerns. I'm joined by Julian Rangers, who's chairman and founder of DGME, a company who pioneered individual control data while enhancing privacy and security. Also, Andrew Bad is here. Andrew is the chairman of MEF, MEF, which is the Mobile Ecosystem Forum, not-for-profit trade association for mobile phones industry. Andrew is the CEO as well, the CEO of iProve, a company which specializes in online biometric authentication. That's face recognition. Am I correct, Andrew? And we are joined by MEF advisor Daniele Menzi. Daniele is the president of BlockServes and a prominent expert in blockchain technology. Hello, Daniele. So first question for the three of you. What can the mobile phone industry do to counter the coronavirus pandemic? First, Julian.
Well, actually quite a lot. You mentioned track and trace, which the most private method of using these Bluetooth codes. We've just put a bid in with various people to the Dutch government, which is all around the mobile phone, because the individual has to also enter their self-assessments. So the government can see how the population are doing. They want to link that to medical records that they'll have available on their phones. They also sharing other data. They're using their phones for video medical assessment. In fact, around the whole area, there's a sort of like a whole system solution that is based around the phones. And that is also what is enabling us to do it more privately as well.
Andrew, from the data authentication point of view, which is, your specialty really, what are the tipping points in this in this issue with the pandemic?
I think what coronavirus has done is it's taken a trend that was happening in society, which was the tendency towards online and mobile access, and it's driven it hard towards its logical conclusion. Now everybody has to do everything
on the trust to that. You're an expert in blockchain, and how secure is the use of mobile phones to counter coronavirus?
Well, I think the main advantage or the main reasons why we must embrace, we must start, let's say, touching an improvement of the existing policy using the mobile is because of the speed and immediacy. So what we are doing at the moment, what we are exposed at the moment, is nothing different from what we used to know in the past, beside the virus, of course. But the virus introduced a concept which is not really something we are used to, which is the speed at which we are doing things.
How effective can this effort be? It's not just a question of speed, of course.
Well, I mean, we have a chance and we need to be quick. So whether that will be effective, well, it's hard to say, but at least we need to start embracing the adoption of new policies, and definitely the mobile is the entry point. We just need to do it.
I mean, from my point of view, I think that the use of mobile apps will be very crucial in limiting a rise of the cases when the governments will relax current controls? What could be the main effort there? The first thing that could help in relaxing the current controls by the mobile phone industry?
I think there's something very controversial that's about to happen. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, something very controversial is about to happen, which is that as lockdown opens up, a key personal characteristic will become whether you are immune, whether you've had it or not. And it's quite possible that that socially, people's rights and privileges to move around, interact, and do other things will depend upon whether they are COVID immune or not. And that will become a piece of personal private identity, a key attribute, which on the other hand has to be shared in a number of contexts. It's a little bit like being able to assert that you're over 18. Today, you have to be able to prove that you're over 18 if you want to buy alcohol. Tomorrow, you may have to be able to prove that you are COVID immune if you wish to travel on public transport. That may seem outlandish and bizarre, but nobody quite knows how we're going to get out of this lockdown, and that may be one of the characteristics. That's a piece of personal data which is very sensitive and will need to be shared with people in a controlled way. And I think that that the use of the mobile phone as a tool for authenticating and authorizing the communication, the transmission of that information will be absolutely fundamental.
What happens if a hacker gets into the system? I mean, problems with frauds, etc., will be substantial probably if this process goes this way.
Let me try and answer that. I'm not so sure that I necessarily agree with Andrew that you will have to have COVID immunity or have had COVID or a COVID test to be allowed out on the lockdowns. It certainly doesn't necessarily seem to be the case in the discussions we're having with governments around the world. But Andrew's central point that your COVID status will be something that you need to have and need to be able to show is true. And in fact, one of the ways in which it's being postulated is that if I own my own medical records, which is something that you can now do on your own phone, because governments have opened it up and companies like ours and others allow you to do it, then that can be a direct display on your phone. You don't have to have a whole new identity system. It's just an interpretation of your medical records can be shown. The thing about hackers is it's a sort of a general comment, really. I think if your medical data is safe on your phone, which it is when you use us and other systems, then it's still going to be safe in a COVID world. The bigger issue is the privacy. The question has to be, every time I'm sharing data, whether I'm sharing my COVID status, whether I'm doing a track and trace, whether I'm doing self-assessments to help the government understand the proportion of the population that are feeling ill or whatever, am I actively volunteering my data with consent? And that's what as now people are trying to put in place, rather than the government trying to grab it from behind you, because they can't. There's too many data items for the government to try and pull it from other sources. They can't correlate it. It's all having to come from the.
That's a very specific and very relevant question, because in a number of countries right now, governments are creating applications in which they can send a text message to a citizen. The citizen has to respond to that text message by authenticating themselves in real time. And at that moment, their location is sent back to the government. So it's a way for the government to check that somebody is in a particular place, and that may be in a lockdown place in self-quarantine. And there's a really interesting question, is that consenting or not? If the government asks you a question, are you a free citizen to answer that question or not? But it's being used now in a number of territories who just say, who say the answer to that question, getting that question answered is more important than the ontology or the ethics of whether it's exactly the most privacy respecting thing to do or not.
Daniele, about privacy implications.
I mean, I believe that we are approaching kind of a two-way authentication in real life, because at the end, we're going to be authenticated perhaps when we start entering to the metro or in the bus. So this means there should be a check somehow whether we are immune or we are not spreading or we are not super spreaders. Somehow that will enforce kind of a policies. From a privacy point of view, that's my personal opinion. I don't make predictions there. I believe we should embrace somehow some directions where people are in control of their digital identity or their identity into the mobile device. So they can keep control for online and offline transactions themselves. I mean, similarly, that what happens in the blockchain with private and public keys. So you have a set of digital keys that protect your data. In that case, could be your identity. And then you keep control out of it, out of something which is purely digital. So I expect the development of new technologies, which already exist, by the way, which goes into this direction, meaning that you can share your data with the Facebook guys like being fully in control, because essentially you have granted them authorization and then you keep track of why and when and for what reason they're using this data. So, yeah.
But I think there's going to be a difference between technology that can be rolled out literally in weeks. So, as I just said, that the Dutch government has put a tender out last Saturday that was due in today, midday today. And that is a technology that can be rolled out in weeks. And it has a lot of what you're talking about, individuals having the data, individuals sharing with consent. But it's a system response. It's not a lot of people in the press and everywhere are talking about what I call point solutions. Track and trace is a point solution. Checking in and out of buildings is a point solution. Your COVID status is a point solution. Your self-assessment is a point solution. The question is, how can you bring all of those solutions together in one data flow with the individual and the government that's consented? Now, there is technologies that has to be done today. Then what post-COVID things, there will be an acceleration, as Andrew said and Danielle said, about other things that have been in the works that have not had a driving uptake. So self-sovereign identity, so Daniel was talking about, now has a driving purpose to be adopted, whereas before it was an improvement, but did we need it? Now it's quite clear we need it.
It's been quite fascinating, actually, as iProve provides authentication for a number of governments. It's both public and not yet disclosed. And what's been fascinating is to see the urgency with which those governments have requested an acceleration in the rollout of strongly authenticated digital identity schemes, specifically because of COVID, that they see a nation which is locked down, is having to transact everything remotely, everything online, and therefore represents an extremely lush target for cyber criminals and nation states. And therefore, governments offering or enabling online digital identity schemes are both accelerating those schemes, but also requiring the implementation of the higher levels of authentication that they had planned, but now understand is urgent now.
So basically, there will be a new normal even in the mobile phones industry after COVID. What that would be, on your opinion? Let's start from Daniele.
You said there will be a new normal?
I mean, a different industry, a different way of using the mobile phones technology.
I think the first change, I would say, that will be driven by this, it's how we do things from the telco downwards, because we have never been coping with such a short amount of time that is being requested as a must-have to deliver a solution. Because we've been focusing mostly on delivering the what and the how, but in how much time was not such of an important variable. Now we have to do it quick. So, and I'm much more focused on how and in how much time than in the what process. So this means it will change fundamentally how organizations like telco behave, because they have to roll out new product, new services at scale very quick. So, and this is not something which is very, very common in such a big industry like telco.
Julian, we will all have a digital passport for not just for health, but for many things, just in a few months after the COVID crisis ends.
Well, it's fascinating. So I work in the area that could be summarized as what's called my data. So all the data that an individual has about themselves, health and finance and social and purchases, being aggregated at the individual and being allowed to be shared because it's better data, it's easier, it's all private, secure and consented. And we saw a change in the market to start looking the way this happens last year, and big companies and even governments are starting to give back health data, we've seen. But it's been slow, a steady take-up, right? This is going to happen in 2, 3, 4 years' time. It'll be common.
Is it now accelerating?
In the last 4 weeks, and I had never anticipated it, even though I've been working in this area for 10 years, it has gone crazy. As I said, we're now 3 governments looking to give this capability to every citizen in 2 weeks. 2 weeks, right? That we've been talking about for years. Now, they won't achieve that. Not all the governments will do it. There's a lot of stuff, stop buying stuff when they need it. But the point is, the acceleration to the individual having more control on their device, having the data, and having to build this interface between the individual and government at scale and at speed so that you can suddenly say, I need X from people, and you can get X in days, which you can do with all the new technologies that have been in the wings, but have been waiting and probably would have been another 2 to 3 years before it became ubiquitous, is happening right now in some nations and will happen around the world in the next year. So these technology timescales, which were like here, and we were all wondering how to shorten them, have just been damned together. And if you're not part of those new technology times things, which is my data, what I'm doing, self-sovereign identity, on the phone authentication, right, represented by the 3 of us, then it's going to be a massive change to you as this all comes down the pipe this year, both during and after the COVID emergency.
Andrew, government's asking to implement all this in 2 weeks, Julian was saying. Is that possible? Is there a technology already available?
Having just completed a deployment for one of the most competent and fast-moving governments in the world, I can tell you that deploying a government solution in 2 weeks does not happen. And I can give you a chapter and verse as to all the horror stories that turn hours into days and days into weeks. So that's not going to happen. But existing plans can be rapidly accelerated. Existing schemes can be scaled up very dramatically. Look, it's quite clear that this is exactly, I'm in complete agreement with Julian. This is, I don't think, in a way, COVID isn't going to introduce anything new, but what it's doing is it's accelerating dramatically the progress toward, in a number of directions that the world was moving in other ways. The one difference I would say is that I think this is going to change the adoption of advanced technologies by older people, like me.
By older people, you were saying.
Older people. People in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. Because one of the things that COVID does is it confines that vulnerable group to their homes and makes them utterly dependent upon an online world. So in the old days, they could say, "Oh, I don't get all this online technology." Well, you know what? If you don't, you become completely dependent on other people, or you starve. So what is already happening, we're seeing, is a dramatic uptake in this technology and a dramatic need for safeguarding of those people and for security methods that are accessible by those people. So one of our core mantras, which is that technology has to be super simple and easy to use, super usable, super accessible, usable by people aged 9 to 90, has gone from being a theoretical construct to something that is absolutely fundamental, because a significant new demographic that is using online technology and must be protected by strong authentication when using that technology, suddenly that technology has to be usable by people who are not very familiar with the online world and they have to be presented with a technology that they can't be frightened of or screw up. And that, I think, is a change that would have taken years and is now taking months to move forward.
Technological response to the coronavirus has been operating at the national level mainly. We have a question here by Esther Fernandez. Are there any plans to implement a European Union-wide mobile application to trace the spread of the virus and to store medical records authorized at the EU level? What about the US? More in general, I would add, would it be possible and desirable to stimulate a global response to this crisis?
Can I just say, to begin with, there is a pan-European secure identity scheme already in force. It's called the IDAS, which the European Union has carefully put all the machinery together for, and has been operating over the last 3 or 4 years. And now you're starting to see players in a number of countries, notably not the United Kingdom, but places like Italy in particular, but also in the Baltic countries, rolling out. And this becomes immediately usable by any citizen for access to any government service. So quite irrespective of COVID, the EU already has a transnational identity structure in place and ready to go.
But it's not implemented, which is the thing. So if you take the question on the health side, health data is very sporadically available to individuals. Iceland, UK, Holland. And the reason for those 3 is because actually my company's done the 3 and there's a few others doing the same. In the US, it's available via Meaningful Use 3. What is happening, however, is that there is a move and the EU in the centre is saying, yes, we should open it up. And the Dutch example, which is a program called MEDMIJ, looks as though it's going to be followed. The EU has already put out quite a lot of stuff saying it would be great if we could have interoperable track and trace. But at the moment, each section is looking pretty much to get their own, although there is some commonality around using Bluetooth randomized codes. You know how that works. And so there are moves, and part of what the Dutch have asked for is an interoperable layer so that you can move out of Holland and actually use other similar track and trace apps. So I think it will happen, but I don't think it's going to happen through coordination from the EU in the next, say, 3 months. There's a lot of talk and desire, but within the next, let's say, year to 2 years, then almost certainly, because that's what the pandemic has shown, that we should have coordinated the ability for individuals and governments to share the data and cross borders.
More coordination in a couple of years. Daniele, what do you think could the use of mobile to counter the coronavirus go global?
I think it's there will be a functional help on using mobile services to get access to kind of a stimulus package. If you think about what's going on right now in the US with the digital dollar or with the 2.2 trillion stimulus bill, actually you need to distribute at scale in a very short amount of time about $1,200 per person out of the 230 million population of the US. And you have to do it quick. So if you want to do something like this at this scale, which is the speed of delivery, you need to think about a process that today does not exist, because you cannot give money to people via the banking system. It doesn't work because some people don't have access, and it's low, fundamentally is low. So the mobile technology is it defines the infrastructure, the connectivity between the people and the government in this case. But the first step is to make sure we give helps, we sustain the economy, we sustain financially the people being impacted by this pandemic, even before we start thinking about all the rest, which is the policy enforcement in the real life. Because if it lasts more than 1 month, in many countries, the US is the first, companies don't have cash at hands, and if they don't have cash at hands, people will not have cash, and then it's a catch-22. So to me, finance will drive the adoption of all the other policies that will touch all the rest, including identity and all the rest.
So a tipping point for mobile health data, but for finance data as well, and acceleration. A final words by our three guests. Andrew, so not just about health.
I think health is going to be a special case because you know, the question that we had said, you know, will there be a pan-European response to health? Well, in a sense, why stop at pan-Europe? The traffic across the Atlantic is one of the most heavily trafficked international routes that there is. The real issue, though, that we've seen is that countries are extremely cautious about allowing sensitive data like medical data to cross their borders. So, for example, we operate the onboarding scheme for the NHS login app. And under GDPR, we should have been allowed to process that data anywhere in the European Union. Not very surprisingly, the NHS insisted that that data should be held solely in the United Kingdom. And across Europe, people are very open to pan-European data flows until it comes to things like medical records and a few other things. And they say this data has to be held and processed within individual countries. So I think one of the issues that we will see will be some interesting tensions that COVID will create, particularly as lockdown ends and international travel begins again, between the data sovereignty challenge, the data sovereignty constraints that people naturally feel, and the need to build transnational health information flows in order to keep control of this virus as it goes on. And I think that's going to be a really interesting issue. But clearly, this whole crisis is going to accelerate a lot of trends. Crises always accelerate certain sorts of trends forward. I mean, all sorts of developments in advanced physics were driven forward decades in the period in the few years of the Second World War, and in the area, I think, of identity, of health data, of financial data, of authentication, of cybersecurity, of video conferencing. I think if this goes on, as I think it will do for a year or more, we're going to see very many years of progress compressed into a short time, very much as Julian was saying.
Julian, your take on the same.
Well, we've been saying it now. I mean, the way we'll deal with international cooperation is because the person that moves from one nation to the other is the individual. And countries are giving the data back to the individual, and that's how you move the data around via the individual. And that we're seeing, and that's going to be accelerated through this. And they'll be sharing anonymous statistics at the higher level, and we're seeing both of those things being compressed. And interesting, Andrew made a comment a while back that no government will do anything in a couple of weeks. And actually, I disagree. I think they're being forced actually to look to industry and saying, what can you do in 2, 3, 4 weeks, and get on with it. And so, of course, it's not the government that's implementing in 2 weeks, because that is impossible, right? But they can procure systems in 2, 3, 4 weeks for implementation, which is happening. And that is the thing that is short tracking everything else. Because when you no longer have to dot every I and cross every T to get something into place, that's why you suddenly shrink the timescales, and so why Andrew is so right that years of development is going to be compressed into months.
So the rate limiting factor is usually data security. The rate limiting factor is usually the government's obligation to assure a very high level of data security for services, and this is particularly true for health. And their machinery for doing that tends not to think in weeks.
No, but Andrew, the good news, and I just need to make this point because you're going to see changes in the next few weeks, is that the industry working with governments for that security around the individual for many years, there just hasn't been the leap to actually getting it rolled out. So there is actually a lot there, which that long framework of security has been dealt with. It just hasn't been rolled out, and now it can be rolled out. And the Dutch program is a classic example where there's over 10, 15 companies that have been qualified over the last 6 months with all the security and everything else, but there hasn't been a driver for it to be rolled out, and you're now going to see that being rolled.
Maybe we have time for another question from the audience. We are talking about the use of mobile to counter the pandemic going global, but there is a question which is interesting here by Count Crawford. What about the ability of local communities to participate in designing local solutions to support vulnerable residents, older people, for example, as we were saying before? How could they participate, use platforms to achieve kind of a local sovereignty?
We're seeing that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Now we're delivering our services for free to a number of startups who have mobilized with incredible rapidity to do exactly that. You know, the idea of putting volunteers in communication with older people, of delivering services to older people to help them with their mental health, to help them with their daily needs. There are a number of operational problems that technology companies can help with, but there are also a number of requirements. You've got a huge safeguarding issue, because behind these sorts of capabilities is also the opportunity to do some really quite horrible things to those vulnerable people. So strong personal authentication becomes an absolute necessity. It becomes an enabler to propagating that kind of technology to put in the hands of local communities to help people. We're seeing that happening very quickly. It's incredible to watch both the technologists build these things in a matter of days and weeks, and their ability to put them in the hands of the local communities who are hungry for them, because it enables them to extend their acts of kindness in a structured way more quickly to people who really, really, really do need it.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. Sorry. So
go ahead, Daniele.
Yeah, at BlockSearch, we are releasing different type of technology which follow the principle of there is a global problem. In this case, the COVID-19 is definitely a global problem. All we have in the world exactly to the same extent, but the delivery, the execution is done at the local level. So it's being implemented on the ground by the local communities. And I'm very familiar with what's going on in Italy. And if you see what's going on there, every single region is not behaving differently, but kind of. They define their own rule, they define their own monitoring, they define their own prevention controls and so on. So the execution frame is done at the local level. So to me, this is paving a way of trying to reduce the centralization of the policymaker and the execution of the policies, much more in favor of a distributed approach, executed by local communities by a global problem. That's to me a new way of delivering, kind of delivery model.
By the way, the two bigs, Apple and Google, have built an automated contact tracing system. This thing, which is different from conventional contact tracing. I comment on that. Of course, it's a technical solution that would be available potentially to so many billion phones, because we're talking about Apple and Google. What do you think about it?
Well, as long as they're doing, so I've actually read through it all, and they're using the Bluetooth cyclic code system, where the only thing you're exchanging between one party and the another is a cyclic code that has no identifying capability at all. Now, as long as they're doing what they say they're doing, which is purging that data after 14 days and not looking to reuse it, then it's a good answer. Now, many people are trying to do it. Some people will trust Google and Apple. Some will go, not so sure. All of these things only work if you get a high take-up, or sufficiently high take-up. So I think that's open. But as I keep saying to people, track and trace is one of many, many, many things that need to be done. And it can be done privately. And yes, the Bluetooth code way of doing it seems to be the best suggestion so far in the marketplace. So all power to them if they can get people using it. Even better if we can then have an interoperability layer between different track and trace, so you can choose your one, that will probably take post the immediate emergency before that applies or comes out.
Question by Milton Pedraza. So, will we see people have control of personal data soon? What about private personal?
Private personal AI. Undoubtedly, the more data that ends up at the individual, including your health data and everything else, the more we will have people building services, I hope, on top to help analyze. I think the classic thing that we haven't talked about today is we're all locked down at home. We're being asked to reduce our load on the health service, and that means that we're now having to do video consultations and everything else with doctors that don't know us, haven't seen our medical records and stuff. So this ability to interact with our data on our phone, with others, with services to allow us to do stuff at home that we never thought we'd have to do, not in millions of people, has again been fought. So I'd say to Milton, absolutely, we're going to have much more intelligence on our own data at home, because we've just suddenly discovered we may not be able to use all these wonderful services like the NHS in the UK and others in certain times.
Andrew, what about private personal AI?
I think that's challenging, because you've got to say, well, what's it for? You know, it's AI is really about taking large amounts of information and extracting knowledge from it. Is extracting patterns and answers from it, and somebody has to take responsibility for that. So, and you know, does that and is that it can't be entirely personal, because the classifiers have to be trained on vast amounts of data and therefore have to be provided by a third party. You can do trivial things. I'm sure personal AI becomes available for trivial things, but for important things like, do I have COVID? I think that there will need to be supervision, regulation, monitoring. Monitoring is very important to find out the performance of it. If something is personal and segregated to the personal sphere, then it cannot be monitored.
Daniele, same question to you.
Sorry?
Sorry, I lost Andrew for a while. I think some instability on the connection. Anyway, Daniele, same question for you. Just, I think we don't have much time, but just your take on a private personal AI and you know, control of personal data.
So I think we are moving. In how much time is going to happen, I don't know. Probably shorter than what I expect. But we are moving in a direction where people hold a set of data, personal data, medical records, and whatever, and they will be put in control of what and when and to which level of granularity and detail to share. And I give an example while discussing with a physician about the share of health records. I might be in let's say in control of all my health data, but I'm not be in the position to share anything with someone is asking this data, because I would like, for example, to share only the last couple of years because of I had something that I don't want to share. So these lead me to think that whatever solution is going to be implemented has to be put people in control on what and how to share with whom. So, and this is a matter of, I mean, technology is already in place. There are many solutions for that. It's just a matter of starting doing it in full control and security. My main concern is to be overthinking about the privacy implications by balancing this with the health risks that we are facing at the moment, because we're facing asymmetry between time and the impact of the illness, the pandemic. Yeah.
So, as many times happened in dark times, we are seeing an acceleration in many technological aspects of confronting the coronavirus at the moment, but with implication that will be bigger than even than this big crisis. I thank you for joining me for this webinar. Thank you, Julian Ranger. Thank you, Andrew Bad. Thank you, Daniele Menzi. And I think it has been very interesting to have your insight. And till the next time, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.